Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to cut through a lot of the noise in the nonprofit world. We're focusing on what might just be the single most defining factor for success. That really intricate, high-stakes relationship between the board of directors and the executive director.
It really is. I mean, it's the epicenter of a nonprofit's health. We've been immersed in a ton of material governance research, leadership studies, and the consensus is just overwhelming.
And what is it?
That the entire organization, its capacity, its vision, it all hinges on the quality of that one partnership.
So our mission today is to pull out the concrete strategies, the essential knowledge you need to make sure that relationship doesn't just, function, but actually thrives.
Right. And the foundational premise we found is universal. It doesn't matter what your mission is or how big you are.
It always comes down to the same thing.
Always. A dynamic built on trust, respect, and a common commitment to the mission. That's the core fuel.
And that fuel needs maintenance.
It does. And, many of the insights we're about to discuss come from governance experts and some really specialized educational resources.
Okay.
So for anyone listening, if you're looking for, say, dedicated training or videos on how to navigate these specific challenges, and we're talking everything from conflict management to strategic planning, you can find a wealth of those at Nonprofit.Courses.com.
Perfect. Let's unpack this. We should probably start with the basic structure. Everyone knows the board set strategy and the ED runs the day-to-day.
Right, the simple version.
But it's too simple. Where does that organizational friction really begin?
It starts the moment those roles aren't just defined, but actually respected. The board's job is governance, high-level oversight.
And the ED?
The ED's job is implementation, leading the staff. When that clarity's there, it's great. But the friction comes when the board starts operationalizing.
Stepping into staff management or...
Exactly. Or procurement, or making direct programming decisions. That's not their lane.
That brings up a really critical point we found. One piece framed it as your partners, not your peers. Why is that distinction so important for an ED to remember?
Oh, it's vital. Because it all comes down to the accountability structure.
Okay, so it's about the hierarchy.
It is. They are partners in the mission 100%, working towards the same goals. But, and this is the key, they are not equals on the org chart. The ED reports to the board. And if the ED starts viewing board members as peers, the whole structure for accountability, for financial and ethical oversight, it just gets blurry. And that leads to resentment.
Right. And when that trust is gone or the roles are misaligned, I imagine the consequences are pretty immediate.
Oh, absolutely. And they're organization-wide.
Yeah.
The experts warn that this misalignment quickly becomes and I'm quoting here, a source of missteps and missed opportunities.
So it's not just annoying.
It's toxic. It leads to mission drift, where the organization is suddenly chasing pet projects of board members instead of the actual strategy. And in the worst cases, it leads to top staff leaving. They just can't work into that kind of confused direction.
So if confusion is the breakdown point, communication has to be the repair tool. Let's shift to the elements that build that strong foundation. How should that communication flow?
Well, it's explicitly called critical to this relationship. It has to be consistent, open, and maybe most importantly, contextual.
Contextual. What do you mean by that?
It's not enough for an ED to just email a 50-page financial report a week before a meeting.
Right, just dumping information. That just creates overwhelm, not clarity.
Precisely. The ED has to proactively flag the trends, interpret the data for them, frame the issues so the board can actually do its job, which is governance.
I see.
And that kind of open communication, it reinforces a culture of shared accountability. So feedback isn't seen as criticism. It's just part of this, constant cycle of improvement.
And that's a skill.
It's a learned skill. I mean, there are unique, particular challenges involved in communicating with a part-time volunteer board. It takes real intentionality.
And that intentionality, it also defines the board's support system for the ED. We often think of the board as just the boss, but it's a dual role.
It is. Accountability on one hand, support on the other.
So what does that support system look like in practice?
A high-functioning board offers guidance, resources, and just encouragement. They invest in their ED.
So that could be funding for professional development.
Yes, or connecting them with mentors, or even just giving constructive feedback in a way that helps the ED improve without feeling attacked. That's how an ED is empowered to lead.
And when the board is truly supporting, not just supervising, the change must be profound.
It is. When an ED feels genuinely supported, when they know the board has their back, they are set up for success. The material says they're dramatically more likely to be innovative and proactive.
Because they feel safe enough to take a few calculated risks.
Exactly. It transforms them from just a manager into a real visionary for the organization.
That feeling of safety, that shared vision, that brings us to the wider impact. This dynamic doesn't just stay in the boardroom, does it?
Not at all. It affects the climate of the organization as a whole. Think about the staff, the volunteers. If they see the board and ED fighting, morale just plummets.
But if they see collaboration,
It spurs that same collaborative spirit throughout the whole organization.
which is that concept we came across, board staff synergy.
Yes. Synergy. It means everyone is pulling in the same direction, not just physically, but emotionally. When the board and ED are aligned, that passion for the mission just infuses everything.
Meetings are more productive, resources are used better.
And all that internal friction just dissipates. The organization gets lighter, faster.
This ideal is fantastic, but let's be realistic. The relationship is full of trip hazards. I mean, the sheer number of resources on fixing these problems proves it's a constant struggle.
It really is.
Let's look at some common pitfalls. Accountability seems to be a big one, and interestingly, it's often broken by the ED.
That's a crucial insight. It's not always the board overstepping. Sometimes the ED, maybe inadvertently, strips the board of its power.
How so?
Well, the research points to a few major blunders. One is withholding bad news, especially financial news, until the last possible second.
Oh, that's bad.
It undermines the board's core fiduciary duty. They become accountable for decisions they couldn't even influence.
And I imagine another one would be making, say, a key staff hire or firing without consulting the board.
Exactly. When an ED acts unilaterally on major staff changes, they're taking over a governance function. They're weakening the board's oversight.
And then there's just straight-up interpersonal conflict. The sources mention needing strategies for how to deal with divisive board members. But what about when the conflict is with your actual boss, the board chair?
That takes immense skill. When you're in a position where you have to have a difficult conversation with your board chair, the experts say you have to focus on process and mission, not personality.
So you don't say, you are the problem.
Never. You say, the process we're using is undermining our goal. That objective framing is what diffuses that tricky power dynamic.
The ultimate goal, as one source put it, is to become a leading pair. It makes the board chair and ED sound like this special strategic unit.
Because they are. Or they should be. They're the pivot point.
Yeah.
They have to be in lockstep, communicating constantly to set the tone for everyone else. If they're aligned, governance is simple. If not,
It's chaos.
pretty much.
And this all circles back to structure. I mean, we still see organizations struggling with the basic question, who is the executive director's boss? Let's be crystal clear here.
The boss is the board as a whole.
Not one person.
Not any individual member, and certainly not the board chair acting alone. The chair manages the relationship, but the ED is accountable to the full governing body. That clarity is what stops individual board members from trying to micromanage.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Let's go beyond the day-to-day and talk about the big strategic responsibilities that have to be shared.
This is where the partnership really moves into mission advancement. And one of the biggest ones is fundraising.
The myth that fundraising is only the ED's job.
A myth that just cripples organizations. The material really stresses the joint fundraising role because they each bring something different to the table.
The ED brings the vision.
Right, they articulate the need and the impact. But the board members, they're the connectors, the door openers. They hold the fiduciary trust. Donors want to see that the governing body is invested,
Literally and figuratively.
Exactly. The ED sets the strategy. The board leverages its network to make it happen.
And looking even further ahead, succession planning. That has to be ultimate joint responsibility.
It really is.
Yeah.
The executive director succession plan and search process must be a joint effort. The board has to define the needs for the next leader, but the ED has the institutional knowledge to say what that role really requires day to day.
So when that process is ignored, it's a huge red flag.
It's a fundamental failure of strategic foresight from the partnership.
And this is where the really stark warnings come in. If this relationship is neglected, the consequences become existential.
They do. This is the nonprofit leadership cliff. The titles sound dramatic, but the reality is just as stark. It leads to ultimatums from the exhausted and unempowered executive director.
So the ED just burns out.
Completely. They're managing conflict, fighting for resources, dealing with misalignment, and eventually they just say, either the board starts governing effectively and supporting me, or I'm gone.
And the leadership cliff is when they leave, taking all of that institutional knowledge and donor relationships with them.
And the organization is left paralyzed. It's a totally preventable failure of governance. The board failed to protect its most crucial asset.
Okay, so to synthesize all of this, the strength of the board and ED partnership seems directly proportional to the health of the entire nonprofit.
It is. A strong relationship gives you strategic clarity, innovation, stability.
And a weak one?
A weak one just creates chronic friction and makes achieving even the most basic goals infinitely harder. That relationship, built on commitment, is the energy source. It's what allows everyone from the boardroom to the volunteers to move in the same direction.
That harmony is everything. So we know the ED's success relies so much on the board providing guidance and resources and real support. So if the entire organizational climate depends on this one dynamic, it really makes you wonder, what is the single biggest action you can take, like today, to make sure your board members feel equipped to give you that vital support?
To help them govern effectively.
Right. Do they need the training to even know how to fulfill their roles?
That's the essential question. An investment in governance is an investment in the mission.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into nonprofit governance.
It was a pleasure. And remember, for anyone listening, whether you're an ED or a board member, for educational videos and more on working with your nonprofit board, be sure to visit Nonprofit.Courses.com.
That's Nonprofit.Courses.com. We'll see you next time.